and welcome to Indianomics. The central government last week tried to usher in a Diwali for the power sector by announcing a scheme called UDAY, Ujwal DISCOM Assurance Yojana. The scheme seeks to improve the finances of the loss-making power distribution companies, and this is a third attempt by the central government in the last 12 years to improve these distribution companies. Today we will speak with two former power secretaries, R.V. Shahi and P. Umashankar, on whether this scheme will succeed where the previous ones have failed. We will also later get you the Energy Secretary of AP State and one power generator, JSW Energy. But first, here's a word on the UDAY reforms itself. India's power distribution companies, or DISCOMs, have accumulated losses of 3.8 lakh crore rupees today, and the banking sector's exposure to them stands at 4.3 lakh crores. They have had financial recasts in 2003 and in 2013, but they slipped back into losses, partly because state governments refused to let them raise power tariffs, but more because of huge transmission losses due to power theft. The central government is seeking to plug all these holes with its latest UDAY plan. Its main features are: 1. State governments have to take over 75% of the DISCOM debt, and the balance 25% will be converted into DISCOM bonds. This will bring down the DISCOM's interest costs. 2. States have to commit to smart metering to reduce the At&C losses from 22% to 15%. 3. Starting FY18, state governments will have to take over DISCOM losses as part of their fiscal deficit. 5% of the losses will be part of the deficit in 2018, 10% in 2019, 25% in 2020 and 50% in 2021. And finally, banks have been clearly told not to fund DISCOM losses. So, is UDAY a foolproof plan to control DISCOM losses forever? Let me invite Mr. R.V. Shahi and P. Umashankar, both of whom spearheaded previous financial restructuring packages of the DISCOMs. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Well, let me start with you, Mr. Shahi. First up, the plan envisages that from 2018-19 onwards, any losses of the DISCOMs will directly become part of the fiscal deficit. Does the centre have the constitutional clout to ensure this?
You see, at the outset, let me say that when you made your introductory remarks that the previous two schemes did not succeed, I might mention to you that what we did in 2002-03 did succeed, because we applied the characteristic policy, what is being talked now. Throughout 2002-03, we signed agreements with different governments. That means distribution companies, the state government and Ministry of Power. It was not MOU, it was agreement on non-judicial stamp papers. We started monitoring their physical performance in terms of At&C loss reduction. It was linked to the APDRP. So if you see 2002-03 and through about 2006-07-08, we were able to contain the losses. In many cases we were able to reduce the financial losses. So I think to say that this type of an approach would not succeed, I would say that this UDAY scheme, I must compliment the Power Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, who has spearheaded this scheme and got
Mr.
the
Shahi,
nod.
actually you put your finger on it. You put your finger on it. It succeeded for a time. But later again, either because the tariffs were not raised or because of power theft, we came back to this 3.8 lakh crore losses. This time the big stick is that states have been told the deficit will be part of your fiscal deficit. So is that stick enough?
Yes.
That was my point.
No, I think that where it did not work, that somewhere down the line, by 2003 we had eliminated the free power from the power map of India. Punjab, Madhya Pradesh and Tamil Nadu included, and that time again Madam Jalilka was the Chief Minister and she did it. I mean, the free power was totally eliminated. I think it requires a sustained thing. To the extent you were saying whether it will succeed, I would agree with you that you put a scheme and then you think it will succeed, it won't. So that whether it is characteristic policy, monitoring of different physical parameters, all these things have to be done very, very regularly and meticulously. I would say that central government, it won't be a constitutional issue, it's a commercial issue, and there is enough commercial clouds with the central government to have this carrot and stick very meticulously implemented and applied, and it should be possible to administer this. Yes, I agree that it can work.
Let me toss that to Mr. Umashankar, because you spearheaded a financial restructuring involving the banks. But at that time, the central government did not tell the banks, you shall not fund losses. Now, central government owns the banks. The shareholder has every right to tell the bank, you cannot fund losses. Won't that be the correct way to literally hold the DISCOMs and the state governments by the throat? Do you think simply because the banks have been told this time, this plan is more likely to succeed, Mr. Umashankar?
Just now you mentioned that the 2012 plan did not tell the banks not to fund losses. That is factually incorrect. What was told to them was that you have a 3-year window. The first year the losses will be financed to the extent of 100%. The second year it will be 50%. And the third year will be 25%. After that you will not fund losses. It is very clearly stated. It is not possible to turn the tap off suddenly because the entire thing will collapse. So when you allow the situation to slide to where it is reached, you also have to have measures which will bring it back in an orderly fashion. So to say that the then government did not, or the FRP 12 did not have any restrictions on banks financing losses of distribution companies is incorrect. It was very clearly stated, and after 2015 they were not to fund losses, and probably that is one of the reasons why we need to have one more bailout.
Yeah, fair point. So now are you reasonably confident that with the banks given this mandate that future losses will be avoided?
Hopefully. You see, last time when this bailout was or the FRP was implemented or initiated, one of the things that we did was the lender can call the tunes. The distribution company will listen to a lender. So we had made a committee of the lenders for each state and asked them to review the financial restructuring plan that the distribution company will give. Now, we also had suggested that the lenders must have a representative on the distribution company's board so that they can monitor almost quarterly whatever was going on there. Now, why it did not succeed is another issue. Like, for instance, you can look at 1 or 2 states. FRP, for instance, if you look at Rajasthan, the At&C losses were to come down to 16%. They went up to 26%. So they just could not control those losses. The distribution company of Rajasthan were in such a bad shape that they could not, the kind of tariff increases that were expected in the FRP were not achieved.
Okay, so Mr. Umashankar, actually you touched on that.
Have to go back.
Mr. Umashankar, you touched on that issue.
I tell you.
Can they ensure this time around that the At&C losses go down? Because ultimately it has to be implemented by the DISCOMs and the governments.
Exactly.
Can that be ensured just by saying it?
No, that's what I'm saying. My feeling is that whether this is going to succeed or not, you'll only know after 3, 4, 5 years. I myself have my doubts as to how much you can force the distribution companies to reduce their At&C losses or to reduce the gap between revenue and cost of service. I might have my doubts because 2002-03 a bailout was organized. Subsequently, as I saw, the gap between revenue and cost kept on going up.
So you think that even now, so your point is that even now, if the At&C losses don't go down sufficiently, 3 years down the line, this government again cannot tell the bank stop funding. It is quite possible that we get into another financial restructuring package. It's possible.
Exactly. So one of the principal things that I see in this package is very different from what probably was done earlier was monitoring. He's talking about quarterly monitoring. The Honorable Minister is talking about quarterly monitoring. Whether that is feasible or not is another question. But at least that says that they're going to monitor the situation very, very frequently. That is going to put a lot of pressure on the state governments. What further levers the centre has with the states to ensure that they move on the reform path is again debatable. Mr. Shahi had mentioned about NTPC and others. I have also seen this sector for some time. I thought that the most powerful person that you have today in the entire gamut is the person who gives them loans. I've seen that it is difficult for NTPC or Power Grid to do much, but a banker can definitely put the screws on the distribution companies.
Okay.
Okay. Now I'll say one more thing. You had talked about 3 bailouts or three financial restructuring plans. I would like to also look at how this plan is different. In certain ways it is different. And that is where I think this plan can have much more chances of success. In the earlier plans, we kept looking at what the state governments can or should do. Like, for instance, metering, reducing losses, reducing the gap between revenue and cost. This time, this government is also looking at what should the government of India be doing to help the states bridge the gap between revenue and cost. I think that's a very, very important thing that this particular financial restructuring plan is looking at, and that is something that you have not mentioned.
Okay, yeah, I agree with you that some coal swapping arrangements and washed coal arrangements are also being put in place. So we are out of time. Mr. Shahi, last word from you. What are the chances this will succeed?
No, chances are that if this monitoring is done meticulously, if not on quarterly, at least 6 monthly basis, A. B. Regulatory commissions, they are convinced through forum of regulators or otherwise that they regularly review the tariff. It might increase a little bit. Maybe a more frequent tariff revision, maybe 6 monthly, maybe quarterly, would be a better arrangement with a smaller doses than trying to postpone for a couple of years and then trying to put 15%, 20% increase. But I am not very sure that aggregate technical and commercial losses, which includes a good degree of theft of electricity, that can be done to 15% in next 3, 4, 5 years through this type of institutional arrangement. What is missing based on our experience of last 10, 12 years in this is that we must insist upon the state governments that they should indulge in both franchisee model and PPP model of distribution management. See, look at it. Electricity today is the only business where retail is being handled by state-controlled entities.
Yes.
No other business retail is being handled by state-controlled agents. I think we have to have revisit this approach, and in many cases we should go in a big way to have institutional changes.
Well, Mr. Shahi, Mr. Umashankar, we are out of time. Thank you very much for joining me. We have to take a break, but we will come back with the Energy Secretary of Andhra Pradesh, Mr. Ajay Jain, and Sanjay Sagar, the Joint Managing Director and CEO of JSW Energy.